again. But they haven't put anything that I said to do with that, because I did say the builder should have made simpler houses. Then he could have had some, not all, but some of the affordable housing. And that wasn't put in because it's just left it in abeyance in the minutes.
Can we note that in the minutes? Yeah.
Sorry, Democratic Services, there was a question there about the minutes last time that Councillor Gordon raised. Councillor Gordon, sorry, do you just want to repeat it just to Democratic Services?
Yeah, this is what I mentioned in the minutes at the last meeting. The builder should have made simpler houses. Then he could have had some, not all, but some of the affordable housing. You got that? Yeah, okay, lovely.
So any other comments on the minutes? Anybody like to propose the minutes? Councillor Allnut and Councillor Atherton, Ian Atherton. Thank you very much. So we will move on to declarations of interest. Sorry, yeah. Can we vote on the minutes? All those in favour? All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. So it's passed. Declarations of interest. Can I ask any members if they have any declarations of interest for any of the applications this evening? No? I'll declare one of my own. I have an acquaintance with the application for Sandy Lane, so therefore I will be standing down from the chair for that application, and the vice chair will take the chair of the meeting for that application. Right, so we shall move on to the first application, application 19/01360/FUL, Wyndham Development Site, Kenilmore Road, Melton Mowbray, and I believe it's Helen that's actually going to make the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this application seeks full planning permission for the erection of 14 dwellings, together with the demolition and reinstatement of an existing boundary wall within the site. It's a part retrospective planning application, and it's submitted in lieu of a previously approved retirement block within the application site. A full assessment of the scheme has been undertaken in the committee report under section 9, planning analysis, and this presentation will focus upon the key considerations listed on the slide. So if we can move to the next slide, please. So firstly, this layout shows the proposed dwellings in the context of the adjacent listed buildings, the highway and the proposed areas of open space. So you can see Kenilmore Road to the left-hand side with Ankle Hill at the bottom. There's the listed Wyndham Lodge towards the top of the screen, the listed stables towards the bottom, and then there's the listed wall which runs through the application site. With regards to the impact on highways and parking, the local highway authority have provided comments on the application, and it's explicit that they understood that 12 out of the 14 dwellings proposed would be for over 55s. The level of parking proposed is considered to be acceptable given the site's location close to Melton Mowbray town centre and the associated transport links and services available. With regards to affordable housing, there has been a challenge with regards to the viability of the site and the provision of the required affordable housing. And it's accepted that margins are tight in terms of profit margins. However, the information submitted hasn't sufficiently demonstrated that the proposed scheme would be unviable with the required affordable housing. In this case, it's a commuted sum for an off-site contribution of £51,000 for a 3-bed affordable home. So this would be secured with the other required developer contributions through a Section 106 agreement. If we can move to the next slide, please. Now, if we consider the proposal's impact on heritage assets, so the plan at the top shows a cross-section through the application site taken from Ankle Hill. So the wall facing you is the wall that you can see from Ankle Hill, with the listed stable block adjacent to the highway, and then Wyndham Lodge set further back into the application site. The proposed scheme is a lower height to the previously approved residential block, which you can see outlined in red on that top plan. And that increased intervisibility between the heritage assets is considered to be beneficial and would enhance the setting of the listed buildings over what was previously approved. The plan at the bottom shows the reinstated listed wall. And as you can see, there would be the 2-storey dwellings on plots 54 to 57 would be built adjacent to that listed wall. This scheme has been assessed both by Historic England and by the borough's conservation officer. They're happy with the approach as proposed, and they've raised no objections to the scheme. If we can move to the last slide, please. So, in conclusion, the application is considered to be policy compliant. There are no objections from the technical consultees. All developer contributions have been agreed to, and the recommendation is for approval subject to conditions and the Section 106 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. Do any members have any questions for clarification? Councillor Evans.
Having visited the site, let's be clear, the wall no longer exists internally to the site. It's been destroyed. Is that correct? This is a listed wall.
To confirm, Councillor Evans, yes, the wall has been substantially demolished.
So this is a heritage asset that has been destroyed.
Correct, it's a designated heritage asset.
Any other questions? No, and then thank you, Helen. Right, so therefore, I'd like to call Tim Shattuck from APV Commercial Property, the agent for the site. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tim. You'll see the face with the in front of you. You have 3 minutes.
Yeah,
Tom will give you a warning at 30 seconds from the end of that. If you could start closing at that point, that would be brilliant. Thanks very much.
Okay. Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tim Shattuck and I'm the commercial agent for the applicant. I'm speaking in support of the application. I've been involved in this site since it was purchased in late 2014. At that time, it included 2 listed buildings, namely the lodge and stables, both of which have become derelict over many years of inoccupancy and were severely affected by both wet and dry rot. They were almost completely rebuilt at a cost of some £4 million, and I hope you all agree that today they both look superb and are a credit to the town and will be for many years to come. Sales on site began slowly as we had inherited outdated house types. Bit by bit, we altered planning on these house types, and since then, sales have gone well. There are now only 4 homes remaining outside of the current application. We're hopefully entering the final phase. The original approval included a 3-storey sheltered living type building on this section of the site. The property had the effect of blocking out any views of the lodge from Ankle Hill, and it completely overshadowed the stables. In 2019, we entered discussions with Melton's conservation officer to replace this building with something low rise and more in keeping with its location, and also to reinstate the listed wall. The previous application was for 38 beds and extended to some 40,000 square feet. The current scheme is only 1/3 of that size and is single or 2-storey. It also includes 5 bungalows, something which is favoured by your own policy. The original scheme, due to the cost of rebuilding the listed buildings, had no affordable housing or education contributions. I feel strongly the current scheme is also unviable. You appointed your own consultant to advise on this, and in May 2022, he concluded that although there may be a small surplus, his views were best case and his valuation very simplistic. In spite of this, the scheme was still extremely tight, and any surplus would be wiped out by a 3% increase in costs. By August 22, he accepted the costs had increased, and we all know that costs have increased significantly more than this in the interim period. It is for this reason that we would welcome the suggestion of a subsequent review of the numbers. Had this scheme been approved within the target period, we would have got additional ground workers and bricklayers on site to finish this scheme more than 2 years ago. Currently, the continued delays, we have had to lay people off, including only in the last week, the bricklayers. This site has been very challenging. National house builders all shied away from it when it was first sold, and I would strongly urge you to support the recommendation for approval. This will allow us all to progress with the scheme quickly, engage more subcontractors, complete the common areas, and be out of everyone's hair, including the locals, as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shattock. If you'd like to stay there for a moment, if you want to turn your microphone off, unless you want to be on YouTube all the time. I'd like to ask any of the members that have any questions for clarification from the agent. Councillor Allnutt.
Just one pair of questions around my colleague's comments about the listed wall.
Yeah.
Just to satisfy my own conscience. You said you had agreement to reinstate a listed wall.
Yes.
Is that the same listed wall that my colleague mentioned as being
It is. Absolutely.
destroyed? So
It is.
it was taken down by agreement. Is that what you're saying?
It was taken down because the wall was undermined by a number of trees. It was infested with knotweed as well. And also some of it was used to repair the wall on the Ankle Hill frontage.
Right. And did you, was that action sort of agreed beforehand, before you did it?
No. It was agreed in 2019 that that's how we would resolve it.
And the reinstated wall, is that going to look as pretty as the old?
It'll look prettier. We've already repaired the
With the same material?
as Ankle Hill, and it looks
Right,
super.
okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
Councillor Higgins.
Thank you, Chair. Just ever so quickly. So if you got the approval tonight, and then
Yes.
obviously it was written up to you in your hand relatively quickly.
Yeah.
You're sounding as if you want to get on site and get it all.
We want to be finished
completed.
and out of it very quickly. Yes. Yeah.
And when you say very quickly, because that is a bearing matter on the determination as well in favour.
March at the latest, Christmas will be the target.
March next year, at
Yes.
the very latest. Okay, thank you. That's great. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Evans.
Thank you for your statements. The material that was achieved by knocking down the wall, and I did see one of the walls being knocked down. Did you retain that?
Most of it was used in the refurb of the lodge, or the stables, or the wall on Ankle Hill. Yes.
You kept all the wall that you knocked down?
What was suitable? Yes. Usable. Yeah.
What does suitable mean?
Well,
I know the answer to this question.
Well, some was infested with knotweed, which is unsuitable. Some was the wrong size and shape.
I'm a builder's son. Did you
Yeah.
keep all the bricks?
So, well, they weren't bricks, so
Well,
it's stone. Yeah.
Yes, stone, bricks, whatever.
All
The
of it.
building
No,
material,
I've
you
just said
kept all of
No,
it.
all of it. No.
Thank you.
Any other questions? In that case, then, thank you, Mr. Shattock. And I would like to open the application for debate. Who would like to actually start the debate? No. Councillor Allnutt.
I'm always delighted to start an argument, as you know. I'd like to thank the gentleman's name I've forgotten, but I'd like to thank him for coming and presenting. I'd like to thank the officers for a very solid report. It's a very complicated issue, this one. And as ever, it's one that's arisen some time ago. And perhaps holistically, I would like to have seen it a bit different, but we are where we are. And I think we've got to progress with it. So I certainly support the officers' recommendations on this. I've read the paper thoroughly more than once, and I walked up and down the hill there. I think, I agree. The sooner we get this done, the better, and we can move on, even though there are some lessons to learn for future applications.
So that was a proposal to accept.
I'm certainly happy to propose the recommendations, Chair.
Before we move on to a second, is there any other questions that anybody would like to add to the debate? Councillor Evans.
Chair, I believe we're meant to debate this before we go straight to a proposal. That's the usual rule of thumb, and we haven't had that period at all.
Sorry, I mean, that you can, if there is nobody opening for the debate, and when I asked for the questions, there was nobody asking for the debate. So, sorry, okay. Councillor Glancy.
Yes, you did call for debate and nobody came forward. So Councillor Alnett has proposed, and I'm quite willing to second this. It's a huge improvement on what we were presented with previously with the home, which could be 3 stories high. The view of the heritage assets and the view of Anchor Hill is by far improved. So I'm more than happy to second the motion to sort of permit. Thank you.
Therefore, I'd like to carry on to a vote. Oh, we can carry on with the debate. Would you like to come back with the debate, Councillor Evans?
Yes, thank you. Okay, there's 2 questions here. Obviously, there's viability, which has come back to bite us again with 59,000 to build one house. I'd like to see anybody in this room be able to do that. So we've got the viability asset. We've also got the statement about a wall that's been knocked down, and it was knocked down without permission, a heritage asset. Most of the material has disappeared, and I know that for a fact. It's a question of whether, and I've looked and talked to English Heritage about this, they made it very clear to me, anything that involves destruction of a listed asset is more than substantial damage to that asset, even if it's rebuilt. It's quite clear. You look, talk to any of the people involved in English Heritage. They said if we'd have been told a wall or anything of asset had been knocked down and rebuilt, that would be considered more than substantial. Because obviously, and I put it to you this way, how would you feel if Hadrian's Wall was...
Sorry, Councillor Evans, what are you asking?
I'm asked, this is debate. I'm making a point that here we've got an actual asset that's been knocked down. It's going to be rebuilt next to a building, which changes the setting of it. And it's a question of whether you consider, and I'm asking the officers this, can you, once something's been burnt down and rebuilt, it won't be built in the same fashion, it can't be. For obvious reasons, the developer's already admitted he hasn't got all the material. So it's going to be rebuilt in a different way. Will it still remain a heritage asset? I spoke to someone in English Heritage and they said, no, it isn't, because obviously...
Sorry, as we've said before, unless I've seen that in writing, I can't take that as a statement.
Well, I'm just telling you, I've had that.
But I'd like to pass over to Helen for a response.
Thank you, Chair. If you just let me to clarify. So part of the wall has been substantially demolished. It's an L-shaped wall. There's parts of it faces Ankle Hill, which, as Mr. Shattuck, the agent, has confirmed, has been repaired using parts of the material that was reclaimed from the demolished wall. So it's the L-shaped section that goes into the site that has been partially demolished, albeit parts of the wall had been demolished prior to them purchasing the site. So it's shown on the 2013 planning application that parts of that wall had already been demolished. Historic England, as the technical consultee, are fully aware of the state of the existing wall. they've been involved in conversations with the conservation officer. And the wall was, as I said, substantially in parts demolished. And this has been the agreed approach for addressing the harm caused through that demolition. And there's a separate listed building consent application that's been considered separate to this, that just focuses on the impact on the listed wall.
Chair, could I just say, I need what the answer to question is. That part of the L-shaped wall which is being rebuilt, I'm assured can no longer be characterized because it's rebuilt completely, can no longer be heritage assets. So we're changing an asset which was there, I know it was destroyed, into what is something that we can't list because it's been completely rebuilt.
Ellen, can you?
Thank you, Chair. So to clarify, Historic England have got a process called delisting. So if a heritage asset has been substantially altered, then there is an option to delist the heritage asset. But as I said, this is a section of a wall that has been demolished, and the advice we've had from the Conservation Officer and Historic England haven't suggested delisting as an option in this case.
Councillor Atherton, Ian Atherton.
So if I understood it right, that the wall was demolished in part because it was being underground by tree roots and therefore in danger of falling down anyway, and it was infested with knotweed, which I assume is Japanese knotweed, which must be got rid of once found.
Pastor Louise.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. With regards to the wall, if we take the issues collectively, if I can direct members to 9.52 to 9.54 of the report, within that section deals with the wall, the discussions and comments from Historic England, and the works that have been taken before and are proposed to go forward as well.
Okay, Councillor Evans, one more time.
This is the last one, really. Obviously, it says it's a very important point to any historical asset. Its setting is very important too. In fact, they put a huge point of that. We're going from a wall, which I know at start was separate from any other building, to one that will be integrated, as I can see it, into buildings, which obviously is not the same setting as it was originally as a boundary wall around a listed asset and a listed wall. So just making members aware that we're changing completely 50% of this heritage asset from being a wall to being part of a building and not being the same wall at all.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Is there any other? Councillor Higgins?
Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Evans. I think it is important. Obviously, Councillor Evans raising is a really important point, not necessarily just for this site, but for all applications. We've seen the huge public outcry about, I think, a non-listed building, which was the Crooked House in the West Midlands, and so it's very much in the public eye, and obviously as bastions of protecting that, local planning authorities need to take their responsibilities as well as owners and applicants very, very seriously. And I think Councillor Evans is raising a very good point. If there are any lessons learned, I think just in terms of one thing which I think is very, very important, this application, just looking around the room, probably other with the exception of Councillor Cumbers and Councillor Gordon, I think it was actually approved before 2015. I think it was probably, yeah. And I think councillors very much will know on social media, a lot of people believed that this site was under the ownership of Melton Borough Council. I think it's very, very important to state this site has never been under the ownership of Melton Borough Council, because the site was gifted to the people of Melton. And a lot of people then wonder why it's been allowed to develop. And again, what Councillor Evans is saying, I think people will show that concern. The reason I raise this in a public forum is obviously the building was gifted to the people of Melton, and then it was nationalised in the NHS, and the NHS sold this site And while Melton Borough Council did give the permission, it's not because Melton Borough Council owned it or it had any funding from it, save for 106. That said, I think with the proposal and the second and with the report, we've got to at least have some determination on it to get this over with. And I think by agreeing with the recommendations and with regret, as Councillor Evans says about the wall, I think this is probably the best way just to preserve as much of the site as it is now. And I think some of it can be taken probably out of the chamber on listed assets because we don't want to see that again. So I'm going to be voting in favour of it, and I'm very much welcome that it will be finished by the latest March next year, because obviously it's causing an impact for residents in your ward, Chair. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, I would like this finished. Councillor Atherton, Ian Atherton.
In relation to the wall, then, are we able to put a condition against the approval that the wall, the rebuild of the wall must use period materials in keeping with that part of the wall that remains, if it's not already so
I'll
stated?
check with the officers, but I understood that already was. Is that?
It's going to double check the wording of the condition, but it can certainly be a condition of the listed building consent application. And I think it has been included in these conditions that it's reclaimed material where possible of a similar aged ironstone to the wall that it's replacing.
Thank you.
No other points? I'd just like to make one point myself, which was to make sure that any rebuild costs for the wall and any costs incurred with that aren't included in any building costs that are included in the review. So it's just to make sure, clarify that that's part of the recommendation as well, that any form of end of, I've forgotten the proper term now, but the end review, that none of those costs are involved as part of that costing.
Just to confirm, Chair, so when the viability assessment was carried out previously, the cost relating to the rebuilding of the listed wall weren't included, and the same approach would be taken.
Perfect, thank you. Any other questions? And in that case, then I'd like to put this to the condition. Sorry, is that? Sorry, yeah, just checking. So we'll just wait for that to make sure the clarification there. While we're waiting, then, Councillor Higgins.
Just while Helen's doing that, for me, it depends on the proposal and seconder. I'd be happy with in consultation with yourself. So if Helen needs more time or things like that, in consultation with yourself. So happy to be in consultation with the chair. I mean.
So just in case the microphones weren't on, I think Councillor Higgins was suggesting that there be consultation with the chair on the proposal, and Councillor Ornett, as the proposer, you've agreed that. Can I just check what is to be in consultation with the chair exactly?
I think it was just the materials, and I know Helen was looking through, but obviously it's a very sensitive thing. We don't want to say something in public. So I think time is better. And bearing in mind you're the ward councillor as well, I'm sure you'll get it, make sure it's absolutely right.
Yeah, so my understanding would be that the consultation that we'll have is basically that the materials, the style and the way that they are actually built, the wall is built, is in keeping. Would that be satisfactory? Yeah, and that would be satisfactory to the proposer.
Happy to accept that, Chairman, if that's permitted.
And it's okay with the seconder?
It is indeed, thank you.
Therefore, I'd like to take it towards the vote if possible. So all those in favour of accepting the recommendation for this application, please show your hands. Those against? Any abstentions? So that is carried. Thank you very much. At that point, then, I'd like to hand over the chair to the Vice Chair, Councillor Mason.
Thank you very much and good evening, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now move on to the next item on the agenda. Item 4.2, which is the former poultry site, Sandy Lane, Melton. And I will invite.
Sorry, just for
Councillor Higgins.
just for clarification, and it's just I just know that I know the chair declared an interest, and if he's permitted in the room, then obviously I think we should just say that he is allowed to be permitted in the room, just for his protection as well. But
Yeah, so provided that the person with the interest removes themselves from the meeting and into the public gallery, which is separate, I have no issue with that.
Okay. Can it be noted that Councillor Swaits left the room? Happy with that, Councillor Higgins?
I was happy just to protect, obviously, the chairman, you know, and however he wishes to proceed.
As your vice chair on ordinance standards, I can see where you're coming from. Yeah. Over to Richard for presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Could we move to the first slide? Thank you. So on the screen, you will see the application site locked out in red. The greyish north-south, up-down line to the left-hand side as you look at Sandy Lane, off which the site's accessed. You've got the southern edges of Melton Mowbray up at the top. Directly to the right-hand side of the site, you will see a blue arrow pointing to a field. That delineates a field where there is a scheduled ancient monument, or SAM for short, in situ under the field topping, beyond which is the settlement of Burton Lazars. So if you move to the next slide, please. Thank you. First of all, the application is before you for determination following a request by Councillor Child as the ward member. Now, as set out in the agenda, the application seeks permission to vary one of the conditions on the approved reserved matters, which relates to the approved documents and plans on that reserved matters. The drawings, which members will hopefully have had the opportunity to review, will note there are 29 dwellings and not 30 as indicated in the agenda report. When the reserved matters were submitted back in 2020, it was originally for 30 dwellings, but was amended down to 29 following negotiations and dialogue. So it's still for 29 dwellings as was approved under the reserved matter. The scheme we have here has a number of changes proposed on it. The full breakdown of those changes are as set out in the main agenda, but in summary, they can be classed under those 4 headings as such. Now, the basis for the changes has been primarily the former of the adjacent field has a right of way, right of access across the site. So the changes have been brought forward in response to that right of way and keeping it in its current position. So the roads and the dwellings and the Nissen hut and the landscape have had to be altered to reflect that right of way, right of access across the land. So if you can move on to the next slide. So this drawing that is on the screen shows you the approved layout from the reserved matters. So hopefully this. Sorry, I'm trying to get the point. No, apologies. No. So the top left hand of the drawing, as you see on the screen, is the access into and out of the site. And you'll see on entry, there's a pond either side of the road, and with the central road running through the site, off which there are a couple of offshoots on which the dwellings are located. There's a pond further back in the site, which is an existing pond. The location of the Nissen hut is shown On the southeastern, just off the southeastern boundary, roughly where the turning head is. So if you move to the next slide, please. This is the current, the proposed layout plan for consideration. So the main road that runs through the site from the top left, moving down towards the bottom right, and then cutting back down to the most southerly point on the site. That's the route of the farmers' right of way, right of access across the site. So the road has been changed, the main road has been changed to reflect that, so the farmer can still utilise that right of way, that right of access. Resultantly, you can see there that the two offshoot roads have been repositioned, as have the dwellings within the site, with one of the ponds on the entry to the site having been removed to facilitate the repositions. You will also note that the Nissen Hut's location has been moved in a northeasterly direction. So it sits just to the south of what is shown on that drawing as plot 12. Now, these drawings are the same that I emailed round on Tuesday following the briefing on Monday evening. So hopefully you'll have had the opportunity to look at them in a bit more detail with a bit more clarity. So if you can move on to the next slide, please. Now, this is the landscaping plan on the approved development, on the approved reserve matters. Lots of green representing the garden areas, as well as trees, shrubs, and other planting across the site. Now, I would draw your attention to the southeast section, which is the bit that runs from the bottom corner of that drawing up to the right hand side, at that section there. Now, if we look at that and move on to the next slide. Now you can see there that obviously the landscaping along that section has altered slightly. That is the section of landscaping that is proposed to be changed. And the change in that landscaping has been necessary as a result of the need to ensure that the Nissen Hut is still on site, and to ensure that the farmer's right of way is still achieved without impediment. So as set out in the main agenda, consultees and third parties responses are set out. The design, appearance and scale of the dwellings previously approved remains unaltered, as does the housing mix, tenure and type. Matters in respect of the discharge of pre-commencement conditions on the outline permission and requirements of the Section 106 agreement are currently ongoing through separate submissions and are not for consideration as part of this application. They will be brought forward in due course. As members will hopefully have seen from the assessment, officers are satisfied with the layout, satisfied there will be no impact on amenity. The one area of note is addressed in the agenda, and that's in respect of the heritage of the development in respect of the adjacent scheduled ancient monument. Now, as set out in the agenda, in the main report, Historic England have raised concerns, but by their own words, the development is still of less than substantial harm. Officers have looked at it and considered it. Now, the planting that you see there on the right-hand side of the drawing, that runs from the top to the bottom on the right-hand edge, remains exactly as was approved in the reserve matters. There's a slight bund in there with planting on top of it, mixture of native trees, shrubs and bushes. That is exactly as approved. It hasn't changed in any way, shape or form. So officers are of the opinion that yes, there may be harm, but it is, to use Historic England's words, less than substantial. The changes will ensure the development is capable of delivery, thus contributing to our housing numbers and the other provisions of the legal agreement. And as such, if you move on to the next slide, officers of the opinion that the proposal is policy compliant, will enable the scheme to be delivered whilst enabling the former to continue their operations. No objections from technical consultees, and as such, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. That's most clear, and thank you very much for a concise report. Is there any questions from members? Councillors, on to Richard. Councillor Atherton. Ian.
So one of the earlier applications seems to have reserved space for a biomass boiler. Could you just explain why that's now not part of the plan, please?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Atherton. Through that formed part of the description on the outline application, and at reserved matter stage, following discussions with the applicant, their agent, the technology had moved on in the interim. Now, since the reserved matters was approved, I can advise, and some of you may also already be aware, the building regulations have also been updated. As such, there's new requirement under building regs for better insulation, solar panels, electric charging points and the like. So that didn't come forward as part of the reserved matters because it was not redundant, but the other technologies had moved on and surpassed it as more sustainable, more efficient in terms of actually trying to get a good quality development on the site. Hope that clarifies.
Thank you, Richard. Okay, Ian, is that the councillor?
Yes, thank you. But I do have another question, if that's all right. So section 7.3.7 of the briefing document says that the children's play provision in the amended layout has not been amended through this proposal and remains as approved. Can you tell me where that children's play area is, please? Because it's not immediately obvious from the plan.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor. There's no formal play area as such, as required by conditions of the legal agreement. The play space I was referring to, it's something that's been happening for quite a while. It's relying on more natural spaces in and around the area. So you've got areas of open, like general open space on the site that would afford young occupiers on the site with areas of play beyond the realms of their own back gardens.
That's all.
In that respect, it's really in that paragraph is incorrect, because anybody reading it would assume that was some formal play area, not a general open space, which I accept. As a child of the 50s, I was quite happy with swinging from trees, but that paragraph clearly means, now whether that's a substantive enough objection to say we should turn the application down, I don't know. I suspect it isn't. Can I move on, Chair? Thank you. The plan as presented and the report as presented, by the way, the report's very good, very understandable, very clear. Thank you for that. Yeah, the plan is pretty consistent with all plans we get currently. That's to say they do conform with policy, they're policy compliant. I've no doubt about that. And on that basis, I believe we should be accepting the recommendations. But in keeping with all applications we receive currently, the compliance is not really good enough in this sense. Under current rules and regulations, there is really no acknowledgement that we are facing a climate emergency, or that some homes require quite a lot of shading built into the design. And there is no real,
Just
go on then.
I was wondering, could you come to the point and ask a question, please, Councillor? Yes. It's not debate, this is questions.
We'll get debate later.
Yes.
Oh, well, I'll wait for that then.
Thank you. Would members find it, I'll come to you, Councillor Clancy, thank you very much. Would would the councillors like the officers to explain the different types of play areas and their purposes? Could that be done?
It definitely can be. Yes, councillor. In planning terms, you've got, as most of you probably know by now, planning's got lots and lots of acronyms. One of them is called a LAP, L-A-P. It's a local area of pay. It's informal. There's nothing structural set down. It's very much imaginative. As opposed to a LEAP, which is a locally equipped area of pay. So that will have likes of your swings, your slides, all that on it. And then you've got for much larger developments, you've got your NEEPs, which are your neighbourhood equipped areas of play, which yet again, it's specific to a neighbourhood. So you've got these different levels and permutations. Something like this would fall within the LAP area. So something small, informal, no specific equipment as such. Hope that helps.
Does that help?
It does help. I must admit, I always thought it was haggis, neeps and tatties, but there you go. You live and learn, don't you?
Why did I not consider that was going to be raised? I have to say. Councillor Clancy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I note that the ponds are next to areas that are going to be for informal play. So will the ponds be fenced? I mean, I can't see anything on the report and I have read it. I might have missed it. Will there be fences around the ponds or some form of sort of obstruction to prevent little children wandering down into a pond and who knows what may happen?
Through you, Chair, I'm led to believe from the applicant that yes, they will be.
So another question, is that anywhere in the document, in the approval on some of the landscaping documents that you've got? Just to make sure.
It's not at the moment. But I think it could fall. So I'm just him in terms of memory of the conditions. Sorry, I'm just going to have a quick scan of the conditions.
Could I just say that while you're gathering your thoughts, Richard, this may well be a question we could put to the applicant when he comes forward to talk to the scheme. Would people be content with that? Okay. Any other questions from members? Councillor Gordon?
Yeah, I think it's great for the older children to have somewhere to play and to use their imaginations and stuff, because I think that's wonderful. I had a great time when I was young. But what I'm thinking about is the really small children. Is there any way that small swings could be put in a small area, even if it's just a few, you know, 1 or 2 even, for the little children?
Through you, Chair, whilst I think most of us can see exactly where you're coming from, unfortunately, because of where the application is with outline having been approved, that's something that we would have had to have put on at the outline stage in terms of the equipment. So at this point in time, unfortunately, the answer is no.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Any more questions? Councillor Higgins?
I was on the planning committee when the old one was approved in 2017, and from memory, there was myself and the late Councillor Buttrell, and we were in a minority of 2 on that one. That said, the question is, because I still have the same concerns as I had back in 2017, is about the sustainability of this particular development. And it seems as if, and that question is, if we're trying to change this for a technical legal reason, which isn't normally a planning reason to approve or refuse, is that not then bringing back into other arguments of what was in play back in 2017?
If I can just respond to that, I don't think so. I think what we're discussing here is a variation to a condition, but Tom may be able to give us some more definitive answer than that.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's the same advice that I gave in briefing on Monday, in that Section 73 applications are a little bit odd because they create a brand new planning permission. However, because there was already the original permission, that has identified the actual development itself. So all we're looking at today is the differences, and any decision made can only be based on those differences between now and the previous application. So no, it doesn't take us back to the very start.
So in terms of that, because the only reason it's here is because of a potential legal dispute. And we might be going into other debate. I don't want to go into that, but obviously with the heritage grounds, we had that in the first one. If it's then not approved, then it's been sort of stymied because of this legal dispute. So
potentially. So I'm not completely, I can't be completely sure about the reason that it has come back. I have heard murmurs about that. Rights of way, private rights of way are not a material planning consideration. That doesn't mean that an applicant can't change their plan or put in another submission because of that. However, the right of way itself is not for consideration as part of that. The reason an applicant wants to bring an application is down to them, and that itself is not to be considered as part of the application.
Is everyone content? If that's the case, then can I call upon Lee Harris, Springbourne Homes, the agent? You have 3 minutes. And Tom will give you the 30-minute, sorry, the 30-second warning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. My name is Lee Harris. I'm the Chief Executive of Springbourne Homes. I'm here really this evening just to give you an opportunity to ask questions. It's been quite a complicated planning process that obviously goes back to 2017 and 2016, its previous iteration. What we're here tonight is really to discuss the variation to condition. This is the right of way that was pre-existing through the middle of the site. Unfortunately, we weren't able to reach an agreement with the landowner to vary the route. It was only a minor variation, but nevertheless, it wasn't agreed. So we had to come back and use the existing access as it is. That meant we had to change some of the planning around with the housing. We've obviously used all the skills and knowledge that we would gain from the consultation periods to make sure we weren't doing any additional harm. And obviously part of that was with the heritage. The other consideration was to do with the Nissan Huts. So we've done a scheme which we've presented for consideration to the council, which outlines what the Nissan Hut is and its form and function. So really, I'm here tonight just to answer any questions and hopefully sort of clear the mist. So that's all I have to say, really.
That's most refreshing. Thank you very much. Succinct and to the point. Is there any questions that members of Councillor Clancy?
Just quickly, will the ponds be fenced to prevent any accidents with children as it's informal play area?
The answer to that is yes. So both the ponds will be fenced around the outside, again, to prevent children falling into it. So we've recognised that, and that's actually on the landscape design that's been proposed, so it's detailed.
Any other questions for Councillor Evans?
Hi there, welcome back. Here we go again. I was in the first one. Here we go again. How much space are you giving to the Nissan Hut and its parking facility? Because obviously, as you know, with the original section 106, it was meant to be for community use and all the rest of it. So I'm just wondering how big that area is for community use, please.
So there was some debate about the size of the Nissan Hut in the previous applications. And what we've said is the Nissan Hut will be exactly the same size that was in outline planning consent. It's the exact same size that the Nissan Huts were originally constructed for on that site. And as again, the proposal's been put forward to consideration, which shows it. The only variation that we noticed from outline planning consent to where we are at the moment is that the Nissan Hut also had the ability to house the biomass plant. And now that's been no longer required. We're using air source heating, which anyone can ask questions on that. We've removed that area and then given away that space for accommodation. So within the Nissan Hut, there'll be a kitchen, there'll be a toilet, and there's a community area where they can hold a serious amount of meeting space. Around the area of the Nissan Hut, there's obviously free space for congregation. And the big change really is probably in the community area, is that the second pond, the second largest pond on the site, is a larger greener space, which we've been able to achieve by moving the access as it is. So there's a lot more community space that's available, as well as the Nissan hut, which we've obviously formulated.
Are you content, or would you like to follow on?
Could I just do a quick follow on to that? You said something that I'm sure is not correct, but I just want to reiterate, because I've seen the original plans of the Nissan huts that are on site and the size of them. And you just said you're going to replicate the size of the Nissan huts that were on the site, which were big. And I know they were because I've seen an aerial view of them. To me, and I'm just talking as I see it, it's nowhere near the same size as the Nissan huts that were there originally.
Can I just say, Councillor, is this a matter of debate or question?
Well, it's just in the statement the applicant made, he said that the Nissan hut would replicate in the size the original Nissan huts. And I don't want this committee to be misinformed, because I can only say from the plans, you haven't got anything like enough space to replicate the original Nissan huts. There were 6.
The Nissan hut sizes, which were generally produced, this particular size emulates that. We took advice from Heritage on that point as well. We also consulted with the parish council and the ward councillor on this matter, and it was an agreement that the size that was being proposed was correct and was a good demonstration, is an interpretation of a Nissan hut. Obviously, the space that was within it needs to be useful for the people that are going to be living on the site. And what we didn't want to do is to create a red herring that was just be a space that wouldn't be utilised. So we feel that the size is proportionate to what was supposed to be designed and what was the initial design of a Nissan hut, and also for the fit for purpose for use, actually bigger now than it was when we put outline consent in. So, okay.
Thank you. Can I just ask Louise to clarify this point, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I just remind members, please, that the discharge of condition and the discharge of obligation, which deals with the details of the Nissan huts, is not for discussion tonight. We're talking about the variation of condition to the reserve matters application. There is a submission of the scheme for the Nissan huts, and that will be determined separately to tonight's discussions. Thank you.
So we move on. Any more questions for Mr. Harris? No? Thank you, Mr. Harris. So thank you very much. Can I ask Councillor Robert Child to speak as ward member? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Child. The 3-minute and the 30-second warning apply. Thank you very much.
Yeah. One of the main concerns of myself and the parish council is on page 32, section 7.1, to do with the schedule ancient monument or leper hospital, along with the surrounding moats as we know it in the area. Historic England object to the increased level of visual intrusion and feel that the changes to the approved scheme do not appear to be justified. The new line of the road at the southeast corner of the site encroaches into and reduces the buffer to the schedule monument. However, when we read in section 8.7.2, the author of the report states that, and I quote, that the changes are still considered to be a good, positive improvement on the site, as well as the setting of the schedule monument adjacent to the site. These two sections appear to contradict each other, so members, in our opinion, have the decision on whether to go along with the officer's opinion or that of Historic England. Given that this is a completely new layout, it is felt that this should have been a new full planning application rather than a variation. It has been brought to the committee because of the changes in the right of way. Now, the farmer has always had a right of way over this land, and with no parking for visitors to the Nissen hut, it will be very difficult, if not impossible, for wide farm equipment, 5 by 16.5 meters, to pass the parked cars. Should you wish to permit this application, then we feel that must be parking provided with a reduction in the number of dwellings built. It is such a shame that the farmer wasn't believed at the first time, because he's had to spend several £1,000s in proving that he did have a right of way through the development. There is still an application outstanding for the Highway Authority to address the 3 conditions, as Louise said, on Sandy
30
Lane,
seconds.
and that will be submitted up-to-date plans for members in due course. Overall, this is an inferior proposal to the approved scheme. The council is reminded that the NPPF expects the local planning authority to ensure that the quality of approved development is not diminished between permission and completion as a result of changes to the permitted scheme. Any development that is not well designed should be refused where it fails to reflect local design policies.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Charles. Thank you very much. Just on that point, if I could just say, and I will take some advice that regarding the right of way and the access of the private access for the farm, and that's not a matter of a debate at this planning meeting. So if that's, I'm afraid that's, we won't respond to that in this meeting. But on that point, I would ask Richard to respond to the historic element that Councillor Charles has brought up, if that's possible. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. To deal with Historic England's response, which is available on the website, at no point does Historic England say they object. They say they have concerns, and those concerns are reflected in the officer's report. And now the officer's report also sets out officers' thinking on the changes and the points that Historic England have raised. Paragraph 8.7.2, I believe it is. Yeah, actually, in the landscaping heading, actually helps to set out our position on it. Now, yes, I wrote the report, and I am of the opinion that the changes are such that they obviously bring a different dimension to the development. But assessment of the changes against everything and weighing the balance are such that I was of the opinion that the changes are acceptable. They will not result in a level of harm on the adjacent scheduled monument that is unacceptable. And yet again, I refer to what a point I made in my initial presentation, was that Historic England's wording itself acknowledges that the level of harm is still less than substantial. So that is from Historic England themselves, not me putting words in their mouth, from them themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Is there any questions for Councillor Child that anyone would like to ask, just to tease out some issues? No, thank you, Councillor Child. Thank you for coming in and giving us that. There we go. We'll open it up to debate. Councillor Higgins.
I'll just start it just because I think when this came to this committee in 2017, I always took a lot of listening from Councillor Gerald Bottrell. He was one of the he was a very sound mind and a very good councillor. On planning, I learned a lot from Gerald, and as I say, I remember him after this particular meeting. He was a farmer as well, and he could see some of the issues that this historically has come about, and as Councillor Childs has talked about, I think here, and I think even Gerald was saying at the time is you've got to be careful what you wish for. You squeeze them in, and this application came through the National Planning Policy Framework because we didn't have the local plan in place then, and then it ends up being if you squeeze it in all too much, you get these kind of changes, and then we're here where we are, and this committee is going to have to make a decision, probably where if the first decision was a refusal, we wouldn't be here. That all said, while I think this is a site that's unsustainable, you're building in the middle of nowhere. We've got some villages who are absolutely crying out for housing for their people who young farm workers and agricultural mechanics, especially in my ward. But then we're building a load of houses in the middle of nowhere. But that's where we are. I am disappointed that if approved, that the heritage is going to be more impacted than what is approved. But if it's not substantial, as I understand it, that would be hard to refuse against it. But I'd like to hear from what other colleagues are saying on this. I'm just a little bit surprised it's come to this meeting, bearing in mind this just seems to be just all about access, because I understood.
Could I just pause you there, Councillor, because we could ask Councillor Childs to return to the public gallery, please. We can't have that and the chair of audit and standards talk at the same time. Thank you.
And so this is, I think the only reason it's here is because of this kind of little legal dispute, and I don't know whether this is for this committee. It just seems as if we've ended up coming into a very unenviable position, and again this committee is going to have to make a difficult decision of whether to go for refuse it and go for the older one, or to approve this one. And I do have sympathy with the officers of how they've tried to make it work as well. It's not going to be an easy decision, especially for some members, as we know, do value the heritage, and Historic England have raised those concerns. And I just think it's a bit of a shame, and I think if it was nipped right at the start, we wouldn't be here several years on. So it's a lesson from history, I think.
Well, yeah, unfortunately, only the victors rewrite history. Thank you. Any more debate? Yeah. Before that, can Tom just do some clarification? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, there's just something Councillor Higgins, you said about choosing between this or the previous scheme. It's not a case of picking a favourite scheme of which one you prefer. It's a case of assessing this application. I'm sure that's what Councillor Higgins meant, but it's not a case of thinking, well, actually, we prefer the other one, so we'll go with that. It's looking at the application in front of you now, assessing any harm to that when you make your decision, any benefits. But that's the question you're asking, whether this application is acceptable, and it's based on the changes from the previous one, but not to pick your favourites.
I sense a question from Councillor Allnutt. Question clarification. I've been listening very intently, and I think I heard the officers tell us that there are two elements that are going to come before the committee in the future for approval. Did I hear that right? One relating to the Nissen hut and one to the right of way. Did I hear that correctly? I did. So therefore, my question is this. Is the thing that we're deciding tonight, does that stand aside from those other two elements? Because my tidy mind says, why don't we get these all at the same time? Can someone explain that, please? Can you explain that, please, Louise?
I can, yes. So we would have had an outline application which dealt with the principle, etc., and would deal with the technical issues. That would have been approved subject to conditions. We've then got the reserved matters, which is the follow-on and the detail, which this is an amendment to. Because of the technical requirements of the discharge of conditions, so the highway and flooding kind of discussions and reports that are needed, as well as the detail of the Nissen hut, to bring everything together is both confusing and also not necessarily. There's no reason why this application can't be determined on its own right, knowing that those other elements are being considered through a different route.
Sorry, I'll just add that it's quite common on a major application for them to come in those three sorts of parts. So you've got your outline planning that Louise mentioned. That is normally a proposal. Your reserve matters, which is adding the detail, the meat to the bones. Your very technical information, that comes last in the discharge of conditions. And that is where things like Unison Hut in this case will be assessed. So it's very common that it is separated out and you wouldn't bring it all together. Otherwise you'd have an awful lot of things to be looking at the same time.
Well, I understand that the difference between outline and all the rest of it, but I've reserved my discussion about my confusion, as you put it, for another occasion, because that's clearly not for here. My point I want to make in debate, Chair, if I may, is this. Once again, I find myself in a position of really saying to the officers, brilliant report. I can see quite clearly what we've got to do, and we've got to go with the recommendations because we are where we are. If you see what I mean, we can't undo the past. And I'm in the very luxurious position of saying it wasn't my fault, Gov. I wasn't here at the time. It's this lot. So that's nice for me. But the wider point is this, that this, which is what I was saying earlier, this application and all the other applications we're getting at the moment are within a framework of the rules as they are. And although we've been promised changes to rules with respect to climate change and options for providing better forms of energy creation, and as well as preventing energy loss, we're not seeing this. We're not seeing solar panels on roofs. We're not seeing geothermal energy being harnessed. We're not seeing any of that whatsoever. And there's the other big thing is, and it's quite clear that the climate change is creating heat spots in many areas, and we need greater attention to detail in design where we want shading. That's all for another occasion, not for tonight. I accept, but I make that point because I'm very frustrated at the fact we can't do what we ought to be doing as a planning authority. But I propose that we go with the recommendations.
If I can just stop you there, I think Councillor Atherton wanted to make a point in debate.
So I understand that some of the climate change issues are covered in legislation that's going to come in shortly and become mandatory in 2025. So we are where we are. The point that I did want to talk about was that this application is to do with a change of layout. In paragraph 7.3.6, it talks about the removal of parking spaces related to the Nissan Hut, not Nissan Hut, as just a point of principle. Now, looking at the original plan, I can't see any parking spaces in that plan either. Is parking for the visitor centre, the Nissan Hut, dealt with in the separate application to do with the Nissan Hut specifically, or should that be considered tonight? Because I take on board the point that Councillor Child made, when you start getting farm machinery using their right of way, any car parked anywhere on that access road is going to be a blocker.
Would you care to respond to that, Richard?
Yes. I'm sorry. I'm just bringing up the reserve matters approval drawing.
While Richard is doing that, if anyone's got any, if you could just hold that in abeyance, Councillor Atherton. Would there be a seconder for Councillor Allnutt's? Seconded by Ian Atherton. But I will come back to Councillor Ziggy Atherton. We'd like Richard slightly more time. Would you like to enter into the debate, Councillor Atherton?
Thank you, Chair. I need some clarification. What is substantial damage to a heritage site? What is called less substantial? Where is the line? Is it all knocked out as substantial, or we leave a metre or something and that's less substantial? I just can't get it in my head what you call substantial and what you call less. Maybe it's just me, but can somebody explain it to me, please?
Is there an officer that might want to explain? I have an idea, but I'll let the professional.
Thank you for that, Chair. So Historic England use their own kind of grading system for what they consider to be substantial harm, less than substantial harm, and then they put a marker, in essence, on the gradient of it. That information, we don't have the clear, precise detail as to what level less than substantial is. All we have is the proposal contains less than substantial harm, and therefore they don't issue a refusal or any kind of comments which would warrant us to look at a recommendation to overturn what's been there before. The information that changes with regards to the SAM is, as Richard explained earlier, the small impact of the landscaping to allow for the access. So any harm is already there by an approval which can be implemented tomorrow. The degree of harm, in our opinion, is minimal due to the minimal change, if that helps put a bit more context into it.
Thank you. Yes, it does.
Councillor Higgins.
Just a point of clarification. I also, because I think Councillor Ziggy Atherton raises a really good point. And Louise, am I right? And because it's a subjective view, it is in the eye of the beholder, so the decision maker. So that's of how you view it as an individual person, with all the information that supports that as well, which could be a councillor, could be an officer if they're a decision maker, but equally an inspector as well. So if that helps as well, it's down to yourself. So, or any of us on there. So in the eye of the beholder, I think.
Thank you. Richard.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the parking situation in respect of the Nissan hut, just checking the approved plans. What I had quickly looked at and taken to be parking spaces was actually part of the turning head, so it wasn't actually parking spaces dedicated originally on the approved drawings. So the reality of it is there's no change in the situation, if that clarifies.
Thank you. That's the way I read the drawings, but not the way the section in the briefing material suggested. But thank you.
Let's only throw the debate. Can I move on to the proposal? I have a proposal for approval and a seconder with Councillor Ian Atherton. Can we go to the vote, please? All those in favour, raise their hands. Those against? Abstentions? That's carried. Thank you very much.
Sorry, can I have my vote recorded for the abstention? Thank you.
Could I also have my vote recorded, please, Chair?
Yes. Any other votes want recording? Those abstentions? Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Thanks for keeping the seat warm. Hopefully not too comfortable for you. So I'd like to move on to the last application of the evening then, which is application 23000409 non-mat, which is Wagoners Lodge, 16 Main Street, Harby. I think Alex is presenting this one.
Thanks, Chair. So this is a non-material amendment application associated to the house order plan application 22/00419. The property is Wagoners Lodge, 16 Main Street in the village of Harby. The amendment would see the relocation of the current kitchen window move from the northeast elevation to the the northwest elevation to the southwest elevation. This window is part of the actual existing building and not within the approved development. Therefore, this change could actually occur through permitted development rights. However, it is stipulated on the plans of the approved plans of 22/00419, and therefore a non-material amendment application is required to make this change. A non-material amendment application is a bit different to a normal planning application, as no planning policy is assessed and no consultation is undertaken either. The decision is whether the amendment is non-material or not. This type of application would ordinarily be determined under delegated powers by a planning officer. However, as the applicant themselves is a member of staff, the Constitution requires that the application comes before planning committee to be decided. And this is the only reason why this application is before you today. It is considered that the amendment is minor and not materially changing the approval to approve plans, and therefore it is recommended to committee to approve the non-material amendment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alex. Would anybody like to ask Alex any questions, any clarification? No? I'd then like to open it for debate. Any debate? No? Therefore, oh, sorry, Councillor Higgins. So Councillor Higgins has proposed to agree and seconded by Councillor Siggy Atherton. Therefore, I'd like to take a vote if nobody wants to carry any other questions. No? Could I take this to a vote then, please? Could I ask for the vote to accept the proposal? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And at 7:26, I'd like to say thank you to Alex for his first one and declare this meeting closed.